The young woman murdered after a night out. India Chipchase was lured to her death by a middle-aged fantasist who promised to get her home safely. Her family say it has left a huge void in their lives.
I and other family members will continue to have moments like this of pain, anguish, emotion until we take a last breath.
Also tonight, how the dream of home ownership is now out of reach for most Britons.
Rouen remembers the funeral of the priest killed by Islamist extremists in Normandy.
And renewed calls for a chickenpox vaccine after this little boy spent 5 days in hospital.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
Good evening. The man who found India Chipchase stranded and vulnerable outside a nightclub promised to get her home safely. But he was not the Good Samaritan he pretended to be. Instead, Edward Tenniswood lured the young woman to his own squalid flat, where he assaulted and then murdered her. Today, Tenniswood was jailed for life with a minimum sentence of 30 years.
Just before she met her killer, Miss Chipchase had the chance to take a cab home on her own. But fatally, she couldn't find the fare to pay the driver. Her family said today their daughter's death had left a huge void in all their lives. Richard Pallow was in court.
At the age of 20, India Chipchase dreamed of becoming a paramedic. She never got the chance to save lives. Instead, it was hers that was to end before it should. After becoming separated from friends on a night out, she is seen on CCTV crying as she talks on her phone. Moments later, in the early hours of a cold January morning, Edward Tenniswood approaches, pretending that he would get her home safely. In reality, a calculating predator who would rape and murder her. He inflicted 33 separate injuries on his victim, the anguish of her parents documented in an interview recorded by the police.
I'm sure that I and other family members will continue to have moments like this of pain, anguish, emotion until we take a last breath.
India would never have set foot in her killer's house had she remained in the first taxi that she jumped into alone after leaving this Northampton nightclub. But the driver of that cab thought she seemed drunk and demanded payment up front. She refused and got out. And that's when Tenniswood struck. He helped her into another cab, directing it towards his house, not hers. Inside, a computer covered in cling film. On the shelves, numerous newspaper clippings of glamorous women who he claimed resembled ex-girlfriends. India's body was found in the bedroom, under a sheet, with her hair arranged in the shape of a halo. The 52-year-old had strangled her, then drank in a local hotel until officers arrived. Upon arrest, he said, "I suppose you've been in the house and have found what you are looking for."
It is clear that India was targeted by Tenniswood at a point in her life where she was most vulnerable and unable to defend herself. The actions, in my view, are of the worst predator.
Police believe Tenniswood had tried to lure another victim outside the same nightclub a fortnight before. His failure then meant it would be India and her family who would be the ones to suffer so terribly. The judge described it as a crime of utter depravity, and what is more, Tenniswood at no stage has offered any explanation or shown any remorse for what he did. Indeed, the lies and the fantasies that he explained or tried to explain from the witness box have just added to the family's trauma. One piece of comfort for them perhaps tonight, his life sentence with a minimum of 30 years means that the 52-year-old may well never be free again.
Richard Pallow in Birmingham, thank you.
Now, there's clear evidence tonight that Mrs Thatcher's famous dream of home ownership for all may be over. According to figures out today, the soaring cost of buying a house is now pricing people across the UK out of the housing market. Home ownership in England is at its lowest level for 30 years, but there are also big falls in Northern Ireland, Scotland and in Wales. Damon Green reports from Manchester, the city that's seen the sharpest drop.
Right, come on in. I'll show you the property.
Buying a home and getting a foot on the property ladder, for most people it's the first step towards a secure financial future.
So the first floor is
But it seems fewer people are managing the feat than they've done in 30 years, with home ownership dropping to its lowest level in a generation. Martin's looking for his own place in Manchester after moving here from London. He says for first-time buyers the challenges are huge, from buy-to-let investors loaded with cash.
When I first came up here, I did look at apartments, and that was just ridiculous. I mean, they were gone almost as they came onto the marketplace. People almost had agents saying, when the next one comes on, you know, here's my details, I'll just take it.
It's not just in London. Home ownership is plummeting in the West Midlands and Yorkshire, but especially in Manchester. In 2003, when more than 70% of people in the northwest had their own property, the average wage was £19,000 and the average house price was roughly 4 times that at £80,000. Compare that to today, and earnings have only increased by £5,000 in 13 years, while house prices are up more than £60,000. It means the average home is now 6 times earnings, placing home ownership out of reach for thousands.
So we've got a standard 2-bed terrace property here.
This house in Bolton is on the market for just over £70,000 and is attracting interest from buy-to-let investors. The agent selling it says the only way for first-time buyers to beat them is to outbid them.
What enables the first-time buyers is that they're falling in love with the property, so they're not talking from the head, they're talking from the heart. Therefore, an investor from the head will pay less, from the heart they'll pay a bit more.
So the only way to be sure is to pay more, and if you can't afford it, you're shut out. Damon Green, ITV News, in Manchester.
Campaigners are celebrating what they say is an important legal victory in the battle against the HIV virus. The High Court has ruled that the funding of a groundbreaking new drug, which massively reduces the risk of HIV infection, is the responsibility of NHS England. But it doesn't mean that they will actually fund it. As Neil Connery reports, that is yet to be decided.
Alex Corsten Ronaldson was diagnosed as HIV positive more than 2 years ago. He believes if he'd had access to the preventative drug PrEP, he could have protected himself from the virus. He's hopeful a High Court ruling today represents another step nearer NHS England funding the drug.
I get fantastic support from the NHS because I've been diagnosed and because I'm being treated for the condition. But why they don't seem to want to cross that line and prevent it when there is a medication out there that could categorically stop the spread of HIV in our lifetime and they're not doing it?
But it's spreading.
Public awareness campaigns on HIV and AIDS stretching back more than 3 decades have stressed the importance of safe sex. Campaigners argue the PrEP drug opens up a new front in the battle against the virus.
It's really the first time there's been an innovation in HIV of this magnitude since antiretroviral therapy in the 1990s. And so it really, if it's commissioned properly and targeted right at people at high risk, it really has the chance to turn the tide.
The HIV virus relies on an enzyme within the cell to reproduce itself. The PrEP drug blocks this enzyme, stopping the virus from multiplying, preventing infection. It's taken as a daily pill and reduces the risk of getting HIV by 86%. But a private prescription costs £400 a month and could cost the NHS £10 to £20 million a year.
There are other diseases and conditions that we need to prioritise the resources of the NHS for. So PrEP, subject to the appeal, will be seen and considered alongside 13 other treatments.
The safe sex message remains crucial as NHS England reviews the evidence on the drug PrEP. Neil Connery, ITV News.
2 people have been arrested on suspicion of murdering a 13-week-old baby. The boy was taken to hospital from a house in Newcastle with serious injuries and later died. A man and a woman in their 30s are being questioned.
Thousands of people gathered at Rouen, northern France today for the funeral of the priest murdered by Islamist terrorists. The city's cathedral was packed with mourners for the service, led by the Archbishop.
Father Jacques Hamel's sister told the congregation her brother had served the cause of love and mercy. Juliet Bremner reports.
A week after his brutal murder, thousands came to mourn Father Jacques Hamel. Outside Rouen Cathedral, they stood in the rain. Inside, the Archbishop praised nearly 60 years of service.
Aurait aimé, ensemble.
He said much of this time had been spent bringing people together.
Au commencement.
He also spoke of how Father Jacques, seen here taking a service, had shouted "Get away, Satan" at his attackers as he tried to fight them off. Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve represented the government. This was seen not just as an attack against an elderly man, but as an assault against a nation. The 85-year-old sister remembered a brother who'd refused to become an officer during the war in Algeria.
But then he would have to give the order to his men to kill others, and he categorically refused to do that.
This public farewell ended with a red stole being laid on top of Father Jacques' coffin, a recognition of his martyrdom. Juliette Bremner, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, a special report from northern Iraq, where aid organisations are warning of a new humanitarian crisis.
And the calls for a free chickenpox vaccine after this toddler spends 5 days in hospital. Those stories and more right after the break. Welcome back. Slowly but surely, we're being told, the battle against so-called Islamic State is being won, both in Syria and in Iraq, but at some cost. The appalling suffering of civilians in Syria is well documented. Less well known is the humanitarian crisis evolving right now in northern Iraq. With Iraqi forces advancing on the city of Mosul, an IS stronghold, people are being forced to flee the fighting in their tens of thousands. ITV News went to one already overcrowded refugee camp at Debaga near Erbil, also visited by the film star and UNICEF ambassador Ewan McGregor. It's currently sheltering around 30,000 people, but with fighting intensifying, it's feared many more will soon arrive. Our senior international correspondent John Irvine sent this exclusive report.
The race is on in the refugee camps of northern Iraq. They're already so full that people know getting as close as possible to the front of the queue is an imperative in case there aren't enough handouts to go round. This camp is the sad byproduct of defeating the barbarians of the Islamic State. As their cruel caliphate shrinks, the number of civilians fleeing the fighting grows every day. Abu Omar and his family fled their IS-held village, along with 200 other residents whom he crammed into the back of his lorry. A neighbour who stayed sent him pictures of the home he left behind. IS blew it up as punishment for escaping. Abu Omar told me material things didn't matter, only family did. We spent 2 years under IS, and all the time we feared they might kill us, he said. As the Iraqi army pushes IS back, a wake of destruction is left behind. No wonder civilians are fleeing this. The next objective for advancing forces is a town shrouded in darkness. Not only is Gayara strategic, it's sufficiently oil-rich for IS to send it up in smoke to obscure the view of coalition pilots. When the Iraqi army managed to take Gayara, it will be their biggest win yet in the advance towards the city of Mosul. But victory will come at a price. One of those costs will be the creation of something like 5,000 more refugees, the residents of the town. And what will happen when the battle for Mosul itself begins? The expectation is that up to 1 million more civilians will descend on camps like this, a place barely coping with 30,000.
It's sort of blown my mind, the scale of the problem here.
Actor Ewan McGregor is trying to help those displaced by war. How concerned are you that following a spate of attacks in Europe, The well of sympathy for refugees in the UK is running dry.
Well, it is a concern, and I'm going to do everything I can with my work with UNICEF to try and make sure that it doesn't. And these people are fleeing. They've lost everything. They've lost their homes. A lot of children I've met have lost their family. They've been split up. They don't know where they are. They're suffering from ISIS. They're fleeing from ISIS. They're suffering too. And they still need our help.
The quest to defeat IS is heralding in a new set of problems for this tortured country. Already in dire trouble, it would be a mistake to assume it can't get any worse. John Irvine, ITV News, Northern Iraq.
And by the way, you can watch Ewan McGregor's exclusive report from Iraq for ITV News on our website. Go to itv.com/news. And a British man has died fighting against so-called Islamic State in Syria. 22-year-old Dean Carl Evans from Reading had been helping Kurdish militias. In a statement, his father said he died in a firefight on Friday.
Here, the mother of a young boy who became badly ill with chickenpox is calling for a vaccine to be made available on the NHS. 2-year-old Jasper Allen's body was almost completely covered in the red spots caused by the disease, as Olivia Kinsley reports.
Jasper Allen somehow smiles despite the infected sores which cover his body. In this home video, he'd just come out of hospital where doctors said it was the worst chickenpox they'd ever seen.
We couldn't hold him, we couldn't pick him up, cuddle him, because he was in so much pain.
Jasper's mum now wonders if his shocking case could have been avoided. She wants the government to look at vaccinations for all children on the NHS.
There is a vaccination. It's not that they haven't got to develop it. It's there. It's ready to go. It just needs to be made more either on the NHS or a better price for parents to pay.
Chickenpox infects about 65% of children in Britain before their 5th birthday. Children in other countries, including the US, Australia and Germany, are routinely vaccinated. But here in the UK, the vaccine costs a minimum of £100 for the 2-dose course at private clinics. Doctors have mixed views on whether countrywide vaccinations would work.
So the vaccination is considered to be around 98% effective when given in childhood, the 2 doses. But because most children get through the illness without any major complications, it's probably not considered to be justifiable from a cost perspective.
He's pretty much covered like that all the way down, his legs as well, his chest. You can turn around, darling. Turn around, look.
As he grows older, Jasper's scars should fade. But this video will always remind his parents of how critically ill he became. Olivia Kinsley, ITV News.
Now to Rio, and the British cyclist Lizzie Armitstead has been cleared to compete in the Olympics after winning her appeal against a doping violation. The gold medal hope was facing a possible 2-year suspension for missing 3 drug tests in a year, but one of them has now been declared void.
Well, staying with the Olympics, and a lot has happened to Jessica Ennis-Hill since she dazzled the world with golden smiles and golden medals in London 4 years ago, not least of which she's become a mum.
Yes, now on the verge of what she says will be her final games, she's told ITV News that winning in Rio would be her greatest achievement yet. She was talking to our sports editor, Steve Scott.
If Jessica Ennis-Hill repeats her golden London 2012 performance, it's unlikely there will be a more popular British winner in Rio, especially given that as soon as she had her son Reggie, she told me she was very close to giving everything up.
Once I had him, I felt completely different as a new mum, and trying to get back into training was really difficult. I found it really hard, and during that time I did feel like, what am I doing? I've had an amazing career so far. Why do I need to, push it and go on that little bit too long? We've had to adapt and change the way we train, obviously because I can't train as much now because I want to be at home and spending as much time with my son, but also because I am an older athlete now and, my body can't take the volume of training that it used to when I was in my early 20s.
Do you think that's going to work against you, though? The fact that you've had to reduce the training?
I honestly think it's been a good thing. I think that if I hadn't have stepped away from the sport through injury and having my son, I perhaps would have carried on training the way I did, kind of forgetting that I'm getting older and probably break down a little bit more than I have.
If you don't get gold, if you don't retain your title, will you see that as failure?
I'd love to defend my title. It would be an incredible feeling, but at the same time, it's such a huge challenge, and I know that the odds are probably slightly against me, but saying that if I go there and I perform the best I can, and if I win a medal, then I would be absolutely, over the moon with that performance.
Another heptathlon in another Olympics is probably a stretch too far, do you think? Or?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I definitely won't be doing another Olympics beyond Rio.
If finishing on top of the podium in Rio is her last act as an athlete, it would also be her greatest. Steve Scott, ITV News.
Good luck to her. And how's, finally, I should say, how's this for family fortunes? A small matter of £61 million has been won by a family from Monmouthshire in the Euro Millions lottery.
Yes, indeed. You did hear it correctly. 61 million scooped on a syndicate ticket that had all 5 winning numbers and 2 very lucky stars. The family's identity will be revealed tomorrow, and we will no doubt meet them on this programme.
Won't they be at work? They should be at work.
Never
the answer
again,
is no, probably.
That's all for now. Tom Bradley's here at 10.
But from all of us, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.